Diplomats and the intelligence community around the world are experiencing a mysterious illness, and they are being told it's all in their heads. Follow me down the rabbit hole about Havana Syndrome. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today we are talking about Havana Syndrome. I hope you all enjoyed like a little spring break, I guess, like a little week off. I know I for sure needed it, so I really appreciate you all just like letting me have it. I guess you didn't really have a choice because I chose and then I just did it. So thanks. Anyway, let's get into it. Let's get into Havana Syndrome. This one kind of makes me angry. I mean, I feel like I say that about a lot of the conspiracy theories because they think that we're dumb. At the end of the day, I think that's what they're like, these people are so stupid. There's so many dumb people in the world that we can just tell them whatever and tell them it's a conspiracy theory, and then they won't believe the true facts that the conspiracy theorists are actually saying. So I have facts about this, and of course, I'm no medical doctor. I can't prove that Havana Syndrome is real and that something is causing it, but I for sure believe something's causing it and it's not just in people's heads. And I don't typically say like if I believe the theory or not, but today I believe this theory. I believe that it's not in their heads because there's evidence. So anyway, let's get into it. So Havana Syndrome was first reported at the end of 2016 by U.S. and Canadian embassy staff in Havana, Cuba, which is why it's called Havana Syndrome, because it started in Havana. Makes sense. It is an illness with an unknown cause. Nobody really knows what's going on. Those suffering from Havana Syndrome report like concussion-like symptoms, which actually makes a lot of sense. Later on, you'll understand. So they have like ringing in their ears, headaches, nausea, vertigo, impaired memory, fatigue, among so many other things. And so I just named a couple symptoms because if I went on and on, I mean, we'd be here all day. In some of the most serious cases, brain damage, hearing loss have been reported, and the syndrome has been so bad that it has forced some of the victims into early retirement. And you have to think, these people are CIA agents. It's mostly CIA agents. You also have like some diplomats, some ambassadors, some people that are pretty high up and all over the world, right? Are people all over the world, and Canadians and other people. It's not just Americans. We're going to focus on Americans here because that's where I found the most information, but it has happened to others. But like these CIA agents in some cases, like they live and breathe for their jobs. They love what they're doing. They want to continue as long as they possibly can to be these Jason Bourne type people. And they are being forced into retirement. They're being forced to stop doing everything they've wanted to do their whole lives. Like they've trained and like they want to do this. This is their whole goal, their passion. And now they're like, yeah, you're going to retirement. Which is another reason I'm like, you guys are like, people making this up doesn't make any sense because they want to do this job. Since 2016, it had like this syndrome has affected more than 1,000 people, which really, if you look at it like in the grand scheme of things, it's not that many people. But I mean, there's not that many people that we have in Havana, in Russia, in all these places all around the world. We don't have that many people out in the world. We have only some, so 1,000 people is a lot. But it's not just like U.S. officials. So it's not just the intelligence community or the diplomats or the ambassadors. It's their families as well, because when they're overseas, they're taking their families, they're living there for a long time. So their families are being affected. The officials are being affected. All kinds of people. Obviously, Canadians are being affected. It seems to be affecting people either in the U.S. or that are allies of the U.S. And obviously, it does seem to be affecting the intelligence community a little bit more than others. But if you look at the statistics, there's probably going to be more intelligence officers or intelligence community members in country than there are ambassadors and such of people of that stature, just because there's more of them So the statistics make sense that the intelligence community would be affected a little bit more. And we're talking mostly CIA, but that we're not excluding, the FBI, because if you think about it, FBI is in country, CIA is out of country, but sometimes there are FBI members that are out of country and vice versa. So, we're not excluding other members of other branches. We're mostly focusing on the CIA because that's who's affected the most. And although about 40 cases have been reported out of Cuba, there have also been reports from Vienna, London, Russia, China, all over the world. Places where, like Vienna, for instance, is where Cold War espionage and post Cold War espionage has happened a lot. Obviously, we're not allies with Russia and China. They're kind of like our enemies. And so the likelihood of something bad happening there is higher because they don't like us. So I would be nervous to be in those countries if I was an ambassador. But here we are. So we also must look at what was happening in the world when these attacks started happening. So back at the end of 2016, when all of this first came about, Fidel Castro had just died, right? And he was kind of like the leader of the revolution. You have the election of Donald Trump, which frankly, it shocked the world. And it also scared Cuba because the Cubans had like an understanding with the Obama administration over the last year and a half that now was being threatened because we have a president that may or may not honor it. And I mean, we all know that as Americans, you see a Republican president, you see a lot of one thing, then you see a Democratic president, you see a lot of another thing. And to go from a Democratic administration to a Republican administration, it scares a lot of the world because we have our fingers in everything. America has our fingers in everything. And so such a major change, especially, it being a shock that Trump was elected, they probably were freaking out a little bit. And then all of a sudden, Havana Syndrome pops up. So all of a sudden, our CIA operatives, I guess, in Havana are being affected by something. And we don't really know what it is. So let's look at kind of what happened. Let's look at like what's kind of causing this, what it looks like. So the victims of this syndrome have reported that when the attack occurs, they're hearing like this loud noise, like a high-pitched noise, a chirping or a beeping. Some say like a low humming. There's just this very loud noise. And some people say that they're hearing this inside their heads and as well as outside of their heads. So I'm not exactly sure how I'm trying to explain this. So they're hearing something that's happening in real life. It's actual sound, but it's also causing an different effect inside their brain at the same time. So it's like almost two sounds, and one of them is in their brains. Sounds crazy. They are hearing these noises within like a few seconds to a few minutes before the symptoms would start. And they mostly experience the noises while they're in their hotel rooms, on missions, or while they were at their homes. And so you have to remember that if they're stationed overseas, if they're stationed in Havana, they have an actual home there. They're not just staying in hotels the whole time. They live there. And so while they're in their homes, while they're watching TV, while they're just doing whatever they're doing, now this noise happens and they're being affected. And what the victims noticed was when they left the area, so when they got up and left the couch they were sitting on, or like they walked out of the room, so they got into another room, or they went behind a wall or something of that sort, the noise and the immediate symptoms would just stop. So they're being completely debilitated, right? So they are sitting there watching TV, let's say, and they're like, this hurts, because they're having major headaches. They're having ringing in their ears. Something is causing them to like have immediate pain, immediate issues. Something sucks. Like, this is not good. They get up and they walk out of the room and it stops. That's weird. That's very strange.
Did you know that over 40% of Americans have a hard time swallowing pills? So when it's time to take your vitamins, large capsules and pills are out of the question. We know that gummy vitamins exist, but they're full of sugar, they get stuck in your teeth, and they only contain a fraction of the nutrients you need. Luckily, Easy Melts has discovered the ultimate vitamin sweet spot. Vitamins that melt in your mouth, taste like a treat, and are packed with nutrients ready for absorption, all without an ounce of sugar. For a limited time, Easy Melts is giving listeners a free 3-month supply of vitamin D3 with their first purchase. To claim your free D3 vitamins, visit try.easymelts.com/spring24. That's melts.com/spring24. Say goodbye to the old way of taking your vitamins and say hello to the easy way. Menopausal and perimenopausal women, listen up. It's time to take control of your health and comfort, and Winona is here to help. Winona is a telemedicine company for menopause care who believes that your symptoms are real, important, and deserve to be taken seriously. And for many women, this starts with hormone replacement therapy. Winona's HRT is made with plant-based, bioidentical hormones rather than synthetic ones, so it better aligns with your body to offer relief from hot flashes, weight gain, and other uncomfortable symptoms. 80% of women who use Winona find relief within just 90 days. So, what are you waiting for? Get started today. Visit buywinona.com today to start your free visit. With free shipping and the ability to pause or cancel at any time, your path to wellness has zero obligations. Use code SPRING24 at buywinona.com for 25% off your first treatment plan. That's BYWINONA.com for 25% off. Winona. Menopause care made easy.
And this isn't just one case of someone moving and everything stopping. There was a report of an officer in the Middle East who was stopped at a red light, and he had his toddler in the back seat. And they were just like driving to do whatever they were going to do. Obviously, he wasn't working if he has his toddler with him, or he's on his way to work. He's going to drop his toddler off at daycare or whatever. And then all of a sudden he heard the noise and he started experiencing the symptoms. You know, he had pain in his head and in his ears, whatever. And his toddler in the back seat also started screaming and crying and freaking out, right? Because the toddler has no idea what's going on. I mean, neither does the dad, but can you imagine how scary it would be for the toddler? And so the officer, who he had been in like a war environment. And so in the podcast, in the Apple podcast that I listened to, and that is linked in the show notes as with everything, he had been in war zone. So he was like, leave the mark is what they call it. So you have to get away, go somewhere else. If something's currently affecting you, go away, get out of the way. And so he stepped on it, went through the intersection. As soon as he was through the intersection, everything stopped. The immediate symptoms were gone. The noise was gone. And his baby even stopped crying. So that's weird. That's very strange. And this has been known to affect multiple people at the same time, like two people in the same room, and they're both affected at the exact same time. Or, I mean, you're going to see it more likely that only one person is affected, because typically if they're in their house or in their hotel room, they're by themselves, and then that's when they're affected. But the fact of the matter is that this guy and his baby were in their car and they had symptoms. And after the attack occurs, and not just in this case, but all the cases, people think that they're totally fine. They're like, well, the immediate symptoms have stopped. The pain in my head has stopped. The ringing in my ears, it's no longer there. But in the days following, they can't shake a brain fog. They have trouble sleeping. They can't concentrate. Everything that they were before, it's like they fall apart because they can't think right. They can't like shake this like weirdness, and they don't really know like what's going on, and it just gets worse and worse as the days go by. So like the following day, say it happened last night, and then today you would be like, oh, maybe I just need to sleep more, but then you can't sleep, and then the next day you're like worse, you can't think right, and you can't concentrate, and everything's just wrong, nothing's the same. And imagine you're at your peak, like mental and physical abilities. You have never been better, and now all of a sudden you can't think right. You can't put your thoughts together. That would suck. So After the first string of attacks were reported, the CIA closed its doors in Havana. For a long time, they closed their doors because they were like, we don't know what's going on. And the government secretly sent all of those who had been affected, like the initial string of reports, they sent all those people to the University of Pennsylvania to be tested. They're like, I don't know what's going on. They hadn't come out with like an official anything at the time. They were just like very curious what's going on, because after something like this happens, and then after days of not being able to think and sleep and concentrate and all these things, especially when you know that you're at your peak just in life, you're going to go to the doctor. Something's wrong with you. So they sent all these people to the University of Pennsylvania. The University of Pennsylvania found out that they had traumatic brain injuries, similar to what would be found in concussions from professional football players. Like these people that are being tackled constantly, and now you have let's talk about an ambassador, because a CIA officer could obviously be in a situation where maybe they're blown up and they could get a concussion. Obviously these guys weren't, but they could be. But an ambassador is typically going to be in a pretty safe environment where they're not going to be affected by like a traumatic brain injury. Like they probably wouldn't get one. And now all of a sudden they have these traumatic brain injuries. They have this issue in their head. They have physical evidence that something happened. They have scarring in their cerebellums, and your cerebellum is the most protected part of your brain. It's not like a part of your brain that's easily going to be affected. This is weird. Something weird is going on. This is where the theory arose about a potential attack causing the illness. So a lot of people thought it was like a microwave attack because something is causing this. Something is wrong. In a report released in 2014, so 2 years before Havana Syndrome came out, and this is really important, 2 years before Havana Syndrome started, there was a report released by the NSA, National Security Agency, and they stated, quote, there is intelligence information from 2012 associating the hostile country to which Mr. Beck traveled in the late 1990s with high-powered microwave system weapon that may have the ability to weaken, intimidate, or kill an enemy over time and without leaving evidence. In 2012, intelligence information indicated that this weapon is designed to bathe a target's living quarters in microwaves, causing numerous physical effects, including a damaged nervous system. So for context, who is Mr. Beck, right? Because they're obviously talking about some person in this report. Well, in 1996, Michael Beck was sent to obviously a hostile country for an assignment. He was detained at the airport for about an hour and then was released, knowing that the country would probably be watching him really closely. He was with somebody else, like a colleague. He was with probably, I think, one person with him. A few days into the assignment, Beck woke up in his hotel room and he was just feeling awful. He was not feeling good. He said he was really tired. He was weak. He just like wasn't feeling like himself. He felt like he couldn't move, like jelly. At the time, Beck was suspicious of the cause, but it wouldn't be until about a decade later that things started to get really weird. Because at the age of 46, Beck was diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's disease. And if you're wondering, I know you're wondering, how do we know these two things are connected? Well, at almost the exact same time, so a decade later, the colleague that Beck was with on that trip was diagnosed with the exact same condition. So the colleague died a few years later, and as of the article that I found from 2001, Beck was still alive. So, I mean, it's been 2 years. I don't know if he's still alive, but he's just lived with Parkinson's disease this entire time. But that's very strange that he had thought to himself, like, this is weird. I don't know what caused this weird illness, but he kind of just moved on from it. And I don't think he would have put all the pieces together that whatever happened to him in this hostile country is the cause, except for the fact that the colleague that he was with had the exact same diagnosis in the exact same time frame. That's weird. And obviously later, because that was 2006 that he was diagnosed. And that's when he actually sued I think he was with a colleague from the NSA or something. I don't remember exactly. But that's when he sued and was like, you guys need to take care of this because this is connected to what happened to me while I was on assignment. And he actually won and he is getting medical treatment for the rest of his life because the NSA was like, yep, this can be associated with whatever high-powered microwave system weapon that the enemy has. So we obviously know that an enemy, we don't know exactly, according to this report, we as a public don't know who the enemy is, but we know that something is going on. The U.S. government has long documented the Russians targeting the embassy in Moscow. So there have been cases of several diplomats that were stationed at the Russian embassy coming down with cancer. And yeah, maybe it could be a coincidence, but what's the likelihood that 3 back-to-back ambassadors in Moscow from the 1960s to 1970s died from cancer? Back-to-back, 3 of them. It's low. And they all had different cancer. It's not like they had the exact same cancer. So I feel like had they had the exact same cancer, that would be really like a smoking gun. But they didn't. They all had, and so one of them was diagnosed with like a really rare blood disease and then ended up dying from leukemia later. So I don't know. Something weird is going on in Moscow. And that was during the Cold War. But you have to know that some of the people that have been affected by Havana Syndrome, just so you know just how they're playing games with us. They're playing games. Because some of the people that have been affected have been adjacent to very important people. So as if to say they could get the important person, but they chose not to. For instance, Havana Syndrome affected a senior aide to the CIA director on one of their missions, 2 briefers to John Bolton when he was a national security advisor. People in the U.S. Embassy in Hanoi had to be evacuated right before a visit from Vice President Kamala Harris because of Havana Syndrome. And there was even somebody that was affected within sight of the White House. And he was an official with the National Security Council. And there's a podcast, and it's linked in the show notes, and it's all about Havana Syndrome. All they do is Havana Syndrome, like research and reporting, and they look into it. They have a voicemail. This National Security Council officer left for his wife when he was affected. He was like, something's wrong. Like, I don't feel right. Like, I feel weird. Something happened, and I don't, like, something's wrong with me. So you guys can go listen to that podcast. I highly suggest it if you want to learn more about Havana Syndrome. They go super in depth, and I actually got a lot of really good information from them. But anyway, onward with this podcast. Here's the thing. Some of these victims recorded the sound that they heard when they were being attacked. We had about 8 recordings, actually, of people who they're like, this is weird. Either they had been affected once or maybe it was a second time or whatever. It didn't matter. They had recorded the sound because something is sounding off in their heads and in real life while they're being attacked. So the FBI analyzed the noises recorded by the victims of Havana Syndrome, and they determined that what the sound was actually crickets mating calls. Yep, you for sure heard me right. The FBI was like, no, these are just crickets. The sound you guys are saying is causing Havana Syndrome is just crickets. The National Intelligence Council formally released that Havana Syndrome is a result of a variety of existing health conditions, environmental factors, and anxiety. Basically, they're saying that Havana Syndrome is a case of mass psychogenic illness. It's all in your heads. Yep. They literally were like, Havana Syndrome's fake. Everything is fake and made up. And this is cricket's mating call, and you guys are dumb, and how dare you. They never once said that the symptoms weren't real, that they weren't experiencing real, like, physical symptoms. They just said that the symptoms have no cause. The cause is all in your head. Psychogenic illness is a group of physical signs and symptoms which suggest the presence of organic illness, but without any clinical or laboratory evidence of disease. So, the victims with the syndrome did actually experience the symptoms, but they only experienced it because they believed that it was happening. So, basically, it was a placebo. The whole time, they just decided that they were sick, and then they were sick. It's kind of like, if you know the story about like the dancing mania back in, I don't remember exactly when it happened. I think it was in France, in like this little village where people literally couldn't stop dancing for days, and one of the people actually died from it because they danced so, like, they literally couldn't stop dancing. But they decided that was psychogenic illness, and I might do an episode on that. It's kind of a cool little story, but it's just very weird that like they just all started dancing, and they danced for like 3 days or a week or something like that. I can't remember the exact story, and I didn't look it up for this podcast. I'm just going off my brain. And then like one day they just stopped, and they never found a cause. They just decided that it was psychogenic illness. And it probably was, honestly. Like, what dancing mania? That's weird. Anyway. But I just can't get behind this psychogenic illness for Havana Syndrome, because people were experiencing similar symptoms all across the world. All across the world. And so, like, you're telling me one person had it in Havana, and I don't know exactly how it occurred across the world, but so people started having symptoms in Havana. And then somewhere else, like Russia, for instance, I don't know exactly, but they didn't know that people in Havana were having illness, and they started having the similar illnesses. And but they also claimed that they heard a noise before the illness happened. So you're telling me that people all around the world, without knowing that other people are having these same symptoms, are going to have similar symptoms? That's not how psychogenic illness works. Psychogenic illness says that person is sick, and then you have the same symptoms as that person. And you know that they're sick. Like, you know that there's something wrong with them, and then you start having similar symptoms. Like, you would know about them. It wouldn't just be something that you made up and they made up. You didn't know about it, and then it was a psychogenic illness, because that's not how the brain works. We don't just know. And if psychogenic illness is the cause, then it makes sense that all the diplomats in Havana would have symptoms similar to each other, but it would have no effect on those in other countries like Russia and China. And so, okay, remember earlier when I said that the first victims were sent to University of Pennsylvania for testing? Well, it was brought up to the doctor that maybe this was a case of psychogenic illness, right? And that doctor became so offended. He had a very emotional reaction. He was like, "You've got to be kidding me." He's one of the top doctors who studies concussions. And he said that he's never seen the brain react as if it was getting a concussion without actually receiving a concussion. And that he has seen. He said it could be possible, maybe, but he's never heard of it and never seen it. And the scarring in the cerebellum doesn't lend to a made-up answer, either being like anxiety or panic or whatever is causing this psychogenic illness. Anxiety and panic has never been caused, or has never been linked to scarring the cerebellum. Like, physically scarring the cerebellum. And don't get me wrong, I've had a panic attack before, and you do have you feel very physical symptoms when having a panic attack. In most cases, you feel like you can't breathe. You feel like maybe you're having a heart attack because like you're so worked up, and it's because you're like freaking out. You're having a panic attack. But that didn't cause scarring in my cerebellum. Also, the intelligence community is completely ruling out microwave technology because the system would have to be like really big and would have been noticed by a lot of people, is what they're claiming. So you're telling me that technology has advanced in cars, phones, televisions, refrigerators. I can order a meal off my fridge because I don't want to open it and make something. I don't have that fridge, but I've seen it in the store and it's really cool. But no one has put any extra time or thought or any extra technology, no advancements into weapons that will disable an enemy. I don't believe you. I can look up anything. I can do anything I want on my cell phone, which fits into my pocket and transmits, and I can't disable an enemy with something similar size. I don't believe you. I don't believe you at all. And if the NSA had deemed in 2014 that microwave technology could have been used to make Michael Beck feel crappy that day, it was used, but then caused Parkinson's disease a decade later. That same technology couldn't have been upgraded since then. You had 2 years between the Michael Beck incident and when Havana Syndrome came about. And did he experience the exact same symptoms that Havana Syndrome is saying they're experiencing? No, he didn't. He just said he woke up, he felt crappy, he couldn't really move. But also, like, it seems in the research that I did, it seems that he was sleeping when he was affected. And when he woke up, he just didn't feel good. And then he got Parkinson's disease years later. And people have literally died from Havana Syndrome. People have, this has completely debilitated people. And it can't be advanced in 2 years. I mean, my cell phone is 2 years old and it's almost obsolete. My computer is obsolete in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. Completely new computers, completely new technology out there. And you're telling me that a microwave system can't be upgraded and changed from 20... And no, excuse me, I'm misspeaking. 2014 is when they deemed that the microwave system could have caused Beck to feel like that. But he was affected in 1996. So you're telling me in 20 years, they couldn't have figured out how to make a smaller microwave system? Guys, do you remember what cell phones were back in the early 2000s and what cell phones are now, 20 years later? Let's say 2003 to now. 20 years later, our cell phones are completely different. We can do everything on them. All of our technology from 2003 to 2023, completely different. So you're telling me from 1996 to 2016, when Havana Syndrome first came about, that they couldn't have made it smaller, perfected it? I can't get behind that. I don't believe that at all. President Biden has decided that those affected by Havana Syndrome will be taken care of, but I will be interested to see long-term consequences of this. And since we know that it started in 2016, we're only about 2 years away from potentially seeing major diseases coming from this, major issues coming from this, if we're going off the Michael Beck timeline. And again, if they perfected their technology, it could be a longer time. I don't know. I'm just going off the Michael Beck timeline. But I'll be interested to see how this is affecting people long term. And also, just in case, this is just the final nail in the coffin, I know I'm on the right track when I start seeing, for instance, an example, one of the Psychology Today articles that I read, they're like, this is just confirmation bias. This is just conspiracy theories. They love to push that narrative when they're trying to cover things up. They love it. But you're telling me that real life people who've been affected, who have real life concussion symptoms or concussion evidence in their brains, who've never had a concussion, never been diagnosed with a concussion, they have actual scarring in their cerebellum. You have this NSA. The NSA has literally said that microwave technology is a thing. Whether they've said it for Havana Syndrome, they're obviously denying it for Havana Syndrome, but they've said in the past that one of our enemies has high-powered microwave technology. But they're saying, nope, it's a conspiracy theory. Everywhere you look, they're like, no, those people, they're just making things up. It's the evidence says that it's a cricket mating call. It's not a high-powered microwave system. It's a cricket mating call. When normies read things like it's a conspiracy theory or whatever, they're going to think, well, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, and the intelligence community would never lie to me. So I'm going to believe that it's a conspiracy theory, and I'm going to believe that it's actually just in their heads. Every time I find something that says, oh, it's a conspiracy theory, those guys are just crazy, that's when I know I'm on the right track and I dig a little bit deeper. It's like a big neon sign saying, like, keep looking, keep looking. So I did. I kept looking. And at the end of the day, with all the evidence that I've presented today, I don't think that it can be psychogenic. I don't think it could be a psychogenic illness. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. You're telling me the psychogenic illness has affected a toddler? A 2-year-old in the backseat of their daddy's car was affected by this. And that was made up? It was in their head? Okay, I have a toddler at home and I mean, when I get sick, he doesn't just automatically get sick. He doesn't just automatically start feeling sick because mommy feels sick. Typically, actually, if you have a toddler, you know that he'll get sick before I do, and I get sick because he was sick. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is, I'm not tricking my toddler into being sick. I'm not tricking my toddler into hearing a noise that's not really there. I'm not tricking my toddler into hearing cricket mating calls and having pain in his head, and then instantly stopping when the sound stops. That's ridiculous. You guys, this is ridiculous. Havana Syndrome cannot be psychogenic. But I'd be interested to know what you guys believe. If you guys think it's really just a made-up syndrome that people just decided, I probably have that illness because that person over there has an illness. I was also in Havana at the time, so I probably got Havana Syndrome. Or do you think that they're just trying to cover it up? Why? Are they trying not to create mass hysteria because somebody could potentially affect more people? Right now it's on small scale, but what if it becomes large scale? That would cause mass hysteria. That's for sure. That would cause some panic around here. Interesting. Until next week, my friends, stay skeptical and I'll see you all soon. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast with everything you hear done by me, Danny Mercy. I appreciate all of your support. Please rate and review wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on Instagram, it's at rabbit.holepodcast. And thank you, Zakar Balaha, for our awesome intro.